Believe it or not, we're less than 2 weeks away from the start of unrestricted free agency in the NHL, and the Toronto Maple Leafs have quite a few holes to fill up front. So today, we're going to look at 5 pending free agent forwards that could and probably should be targets for the Leafs coming up in a couple of weeks. Before we get into some of the targets I've identified in the free agent class, I think it's important to begin with, well, what positions do the Leafs even need to fill? Unlike most years in the past where it's been so focused on the defense, it's actually the forwards that need the most work this time around. If you look at the current kind of projection going into next season, depending on what Seattle does, the Leafs could be looking at needing 3 left wingers, 2 of which in the top 6, a third line center, maybe even a fourth line center, depending on any trades that happen, compared to maybe 0 on defense and at most 1 backup goaltender or split starter. So today we're looking at forwards exclusively. The goaltenders are a whole different thing, but we're looking at, I think, 2 to maybe 3 areas of need. Top 6 left wing, third line center, and then depth kind of wingers, center, kind of wherever. So those are the 3 areas that we're going to be looking at today. Top 6 left wing, third line center, and then just kind of general depth. And we'll begin with somebody that I think is the perfect candidate for that third line center position. Let's begin with target number 1 at third line center, Nick Bonino. Bonino is potentially the prototypical third-line center in the NHL. Spent last year with the Minnesota Wild, putting up 26 points in 55 games playing as their third-line center. And Bonino has consistently been that these last few years with Nashville previous and, of course, this past year with the Wild. He's been money in that 30 to 40-point range, usually on the lower side of that, but in that range, and consistently providing value both defensively at 5-on-5 and especially so on the penalty kill. And that combination makes him a big target for myself. To begin, you have to replace Zach Hyman this offseason, and that's going to be a big ask, not just from his 5-on-5 value, playing in the top 6, being such a great complementary piece, but also on the penalty kill, because he's a player that, even though he's a winger, has taken faceoffs for the Leafs on the penalty kill. And so bringing in somebody like Nick Bonino, who is a center, takes faceoffs, wins a decent chunk of them, and also has led his team this past season in the Wild in terms of forwards playing on the penalty kill at over 100 minutes last season. That seems like a very good recipe. When you look last season for the Leafs, Zach Hyman ranked 4th on the team in penalty kill minutes among forwards, and that was only because he missed 13 games of the season. Had he not missed those 13 games, he would have been much closer to Mitch Marner at 107 minutes. He currently, or after the season, he ranked 4th on the team behind Marner, as I mentioned, at 107 minutes, Ilya Mikheyev at 85 minutes, and Alex Kerfoot also at 85 minutes. Zach Hyman ranked 4th on the team at 84 minutes, and as I said, playing 13 less games there. So Hyman is a player that the Leafs depended on their penalty kill and need to replace that. And Nick Bonino can provide you third line center value while also being that number 1 go-to penalty kill guy for you. The big thing with Nick Bonino is what he's been able to do these past few years. He still ranks in the 85th percentile in terms of wins above replacement, exceptionally so in terms of the defensive side at 82%, 98% on penalty kill. So this is a player that provides exactly what the Leafs need and have seemingly wanted from that third line in years past. So Nick Bonino is near the top of my chart. A big question mark for the Leafs this offseason is who gets taken by Seattle in the expansion draft. And one of the players that most people like to link to Seattle is Alexander Kerfoot, which makes a lot of sense. It's a reasonable cap hit at $3.5 million. He's a middle to later 20s player that can play center, and that's an area of need for Seattle in the expansion draft. There's not a ton of good centers that will be available, because if he's taken by Seattle, well, then you know you have to fill that kind of position. But even if he isn't, I would like to go out and get a third line center, because Kerfoot this past year was not that good on the third line, trying to be the guy, drive play on the third line. It didn't really work. Shifting him to the left wing, though, or playing him with William Nylander seemed to really work, though. So if Kerfoot's still on this team next year, which I'm not certain he is, I would like to see him on the second line left wing spot and bring in somebody else for that third line center spot. This past year, Kerfoot was one of the worst regular centers in the NHL in terms of winning faceoffs. Among players that took over 100 faceoffs in the NHL last year, Kerfoot was bottom 10. And the only players that were worse than that took more faceoffs than him were Vladislav Nemesnikov with Detroit, Jack Roslovic with Winnipeg and Columbus, Alex Texier with Columbus, and Jack Hughes with New Jersey. That simply isn't good enough at a center position versus Nick Bonino, who won at 52.8%, which ranked inside the top 50 among centers that took over 100 faceoffs last year. So checks the box in terms of being able to win faceoffs, checks the box in terms of playing that consistent third line center position, providing value defensively, being able to chip in 30-ish points, but also plays a big role on the penalty kill. So checking as many boxes as he does, and probably coming in the $2.5 to $3 million range on a 2-year contract most likely, Nick Bonino seems like a perfect fit for the Leafs and is probably my number one target. These next two targets, we're going to go to that top 6 left wing position, and the Leafs probably have 2 players to fill in at that spot depending on what happens. Zach Hyman is almost certainly out the door. Galchenyuk could return as maybe a filler on that second line, but maybe Alex Kerfoot stays and plays that role. But we're probably looking at 2 new players, or at least 2 signings or trades or whatever to make to fill in those top 6 positions. And these next 2 targets, you only get one of them, but I feel like these 2 are probably the best targets to look at for that position if you take into account the quality of player, the potential contract that they could get, and some of their past performance. So let's begin with that second target, and one that you're probably not going to like so much off the bat, in Tomas Tatar. Yes, Tomas Tatar. Now, just hear me out for a second. Tatar is almost the number 1 buy low target for this offseason. He was just scratched for much of Montreal's playoffs. I don't know how much of that began as an injury and just became him staying out of the lineup with how good that team was rolling. But the facts are the facts, and he was not in the lineup while the Habs went to the Stanley Cup final. And that means a lot to NHL general managers. But let's not forget the player that Tomas Tatar is. He's been a fantastic player for the Montreal Canadiens in his career there, assuming it doesn't continue past this season. In his 3 years there, he began with a 58-point season in 2018-19, followed it up with almost a point per game season, scoring 61 points in 68 games in 2019-20, and this year taking a bit of a step back, just 30 points in 50 games, but still being one of Montreal's bigger offensive contributors. The big knock on Tomas Tatar over his career has been his playoff performance, or at least recently. You look at when he was acquired by Vegas, he didn't really fit in that lineup in the 20-game stretch at the end of the season, was kind of in and out of the lineup in the playoffs, only had 2 points in 8 games despite that team going to the Cup final. Makes the playoffs again with Montreal in 2020 with the play-ins, and then them going on that slight run playing Philadelphia and losing to them. 2 goals in 10 games. That's the only production he had. And then this past year, going to the Cup final, only playing in 5 games and having 1 assist. So people will look to that and go, this guy isn't a playoff performer. And maybe that is the case. But looking at Tatar in the past, with Detroit, he had 3 assists in 5 games in 2016. He had 3 goals, 4 points in 7 games in 2015. And he had 16 goals and 21 points in Grand Rapids' 24 playoff games in 2013. So it's not like he hasn't shown up before in the playoffs. It's just been kind of a victim of circumstance. In 2018, he never really fit into that Vegas team. I'm going to put that one aside. In 2020, yes, he was legitimately not good enough for the Habs in the playoffs. But this past year, he only played in 5 games. He was decent in those in creating chances. They just didn't go in, and then he ended up outside of the lineup. So I'm going to push that to the side because I'm looking for good players. And in my opinion, Tomas Tatar is a very strong player and a bona fide top 6 winger. He ranks in the 94th percentile in terms of wins above replacement this year, driving offense extremely well, being a fantastic passer in terms of primary assists. and playing alongside Philip Deneau and Brendan Gallagher for the most part over the past 2 seasons, has faced top competition and is ranked out pretty okay in terms of defense, although a lot of that is probably piggybacking off of what Philip Deneau has done. So Tomas Tatar has proven over these last couple years that, one, he can still play, can still do it at a top 6 level, and can do it alongside good players. And when I look at the Leafs, and whether that's playing on the first line with Matthews and Marner or the second line with Tavares and Nylander, those seem like 2 very good spots for him to go, step into that spot, and be a very strong contributor. So looking at the potential top 6 wingers available, you're going to have to pay up for a lot of them, and Tomas Tatar feels like somebody that you maybe don't have to pay up for as much as maybe you would anticipate. By Evolving Wild's projections, Tomas Tatar is projected at a 3-year contract at $5.2 million. Do any of us think Tomas Tatar is going to get $5+ million with a couple of years on a contract from a team this offseason, given what just happened with the Habs in the playoffs? I certainly don't. Now, it could happen that multiple teams think of Tatar as this buy low candidate, and all of a sudden his price does go up to that point. I just don't see that as the likely scenario. I look at Tomas Tatar as a guy that's going to be like last year's Tyler Toffoli. He's going to sit a couple days in free agency and sign, probably in Tatar's case, as a bit older than Toffoli, for a short-term, kind of cheaper deal, maybe on a good team, maybe not on a good team, but kind of on a prove-it deal, kind of bring it back some of his value. I could see him signing for a couple years in the $3.5 million range. And when you look at Tomas Tatar just over a year ago, scoring at nearly a point per game rate, I think that's a slam dunk signing. So looking at the free agent class, although he did have a bit of a down season, and he did miss the playoffs for the Habs and all this kind of stuff, I just feel like Tomas Tatar is going to be one of those players that we look back in a year and go, wow, how did somebody sign him for that much money? He had a great season, and I feel like the Leafs could take advantage of that, looking at the holes in the top 6 left-wing positions. And kind of going off of Tomas Tatar as that buy low left-wing top 6 candidate who scored well in the past, had a bit of a down season but still provides value, is our target number 3 in Jaden Schwartz. And Schwartz is somebody that I feel like, just because of his name value, some of his pedigree, having won a cup recently with St. Louis, is going to be somebody that doesn't get that kind of lower contract that maybe you would anticipate for that Tomas Tatar does get. But Jaden Schwartz did have a very down season. He only scored 21 points in 40 games, slightly over just a half point per game, which isn't the type of production that you would expect from him. You look the year previous, 57 points, 22 goals in 71 games. That's the production you expect from Jaden Schwartz. You look the year previous when in that Stanley Cup run, he had 12 goals and 20 points in 26 games with the Blues as they went on to win the Stanley Cup in 2019. So Jaden Schwartz is more of a long shot, is what I'll say. He's a little bit younger than Tomas Tatar, and he's got that playoff scoring pedigree, which I think pushes him above the rest. And because of that, even though he did have a down season scoring at just over a half point per game, he feels like a guy that's going to get that kind of richer contract nonetheless, and maybe he even just stays in St. Louis. But Jaden Schwartz is projected at a 3-year contract at $4.75 million by Evolving Wild, and that feels like it's about in the range. I could see him getting a little bit less than that just because he did score at a half point per game this season, maybe closer to that $4 million spot, and that's where you would feel a bit more comfortable if you're the Leafs. But he's kind of that secondary option where he could be available for a bit lesser, something like that. I just don't know if he's necessarily the guy that will happen to. But Jaden Schwartz is still a fantastic player, whether he's scoring or not either. This past season, he ranked in the top 90s in terms of even strength defense percentile, up there at 98%. So even though the scoring did dry up quite a bit, the finishing dropped significantly this past season with only like 8 goals or something like that this year. Yeah, 8 goals this past season. Jaden Schwartz still provided value in terms of even strength defense, playing against good players. And if he gets in the Leafs top 6, I would imagine that scoring would bounce back up playing with some of those players. So I like Jaden Schwartz's fit. He doesn't provide much penalty kill, doesn't provide much power play. How much would you be willing to spend for somebody that's only going to be like an even strength guy for you primarily, but be a pretty solid one at that? 4 million seems to be around that number. So Tatar and Schwartz are the two left-wing top 6 candidates I look at in the free agent market. It might be something they look to do in terms of the trade market. We've seen names like Tyler Bertuzzi and stuff like that. That could be the Leafs' choice to fill those holes. But in terms of free agents, Tomas Tatar is a very solid player still, top 6 bona fide winger who feels like he's probably going to get underpaid, and Jaden Schwartz, coming off of a down season, could maybe capitalize on that as well. Those are the two that I'm looking at as potential left-wing candidates in the top 6. So we've hit on a third-line center in Nick Bonino. We've hit on a couple of top 6 left wingers in Tomas Tatar and Jaden Schwartz. Let's get to some depth players that I feel like could be very strong signings in terms of what the Leafs need. And we'll begin with target number 4 for the left wing, kind of third line, fourth line, kind of interchangeable spot in Brock McGinn. And again, not a sexy name in Brock McGinn, but there are a lot of kind of ties that make him make sense for the Leafs this offseason. For starters, the Leafs need to do better in terms of finding those players that sign for less than $2 million and can provide you value in the bottom 6. The bottom 6 was fine at times this year, but we saw in the playoffs when the injury happened to John Tavares and Alexander Kerfoot had to step up, you didn't really get anything from the third line after that. You got some scoring from Jason Spezza, you always get that, but you got nothing from anybody else. So in terms of that, you need to find more players that provide you more value, whether that be even strength or special teams. And then in the case of Brock McGinn, this is a player that provides a little bit of both. He's been a bottom 6 player for the Carolina Hurricanes these last handful of seasons, becoming a free agent this year for the first time at 27 years old, so he's on the younger side of free agents. Not a big-time scorer. Career high of 30 points. He's going to score you in the range of like 10 to 15 goals, 25 to 30 points. Nothing spectacular there. But the big thing, at least for myself, looking at Brock McGinn, is his ties to new Leafs assistant coach, Dean Chenoweth, a coach who has been with Carolina the past 3 seasons running their defensive penalty kill. Over the past 3 seasons, their most used forward on the penalty kill is Brock McGinn. He played on the penalty kill over a full game's worth more than their second most used player on the penalty kill at forward in Jordan Staal. Jordan Staal played 361 minutes shorthanded for Carolina these past 3 seasons. Brock McGinn played 426 minutes. So over an hour's worth more playing time shorthanded Brock McGinn did than Jordan Staal. So there's that for starters, and he did it very, very well. He ranked in the 83rd percentile in terms of penalty kill wins above replacement. Even strength defense as well ranks very well at 75%, and he also played against pretty decent competition, ranking in the 77th percentile in terms of quality of competition. So Brock McGinn, he's had some cameos a bit higher in the lineup, playing alongside guys like Sebastian Aho and whatnot, Vincent Trocheck at times, but mainly a bottom 6 guy, mainly playing third line minutes for Carolina. And when you think about what the Leafs need, again, going back to Zach Hyman, let's say Zach Hyman's gone, which feels likely, but let's say Alex Kerfoot's gone as well. All of a sudden, 2 of your top 4 most used penalty kill forwards you have to replace. And Nick Bonino does a good job of that, but you need more help with that. And I feel like Brock McGinn could be a good candidate to chip in a little bit of offense at even strength, be a good even strength defender, but also provide some very, very strong penalty kill value. The big question is kind of how much he's going to cost. He's projected by Evolving Wild to be a 3-year contract at $2.6 million, which is pretty rich for myself. But if he's less than that, if he's in the 1.5 to $2 million range, which feels more likely in this flat cap scenario, Brock McGinn could be a very, very strong option for the Leafs. He's also an Ontario boy as well, from Fergus, Ontario, played in the OHL, so maybe that affects whether he would like to come to Toronto or not. But given the ties to Chenoweth, I don't know how to pronounce his name, I'm sorry. I think it's Dean Chenoweth or Chenoweth, something along those lines. Sorry about that. Given the ties to Dean, the assistant coach from Carolina coming to the Leafs, playing the penalty kill, providing the even strength defensive value, playing that left wing, I feel like he ticks a lot of those boxes as well and could be a decent depth fit for the Leafs. For this last target, I'm going to bring you back to 28. 2018. And that's because target number 5 is Derek Ryan. Derek Ryan was almost a Leaf. In 2018, if the Leafs didn't sign John Tavares, the Leafs were going to sign Derek Ryan to be their third-line center. That's been fairly well documented. Instead, the Leafs signed John Tavares to that massive contract, bumps Nazem Kadri down to the third-line center. They don't need that center anymore, and Derek Ryan goes to Calgary for 3 years at $3.125 million. And Derek Ryan, for this first couple of years, provided about $3 million worth of value. A very strong defensive player, but also scored in those first 2 seasons with the Flames. 38 points in 81 games in 2018-19, 29 points in 68 games in 2019-20. But this past year, things dropped off a little bit. He was placed on waivers and cleared waivers at the beginning of the year with his $3 million cap hit. Remained on the roster the whole season for the most part, getting some time on the taxi squad to save some money and whatnot. But ended up playing 43 games for the Flames this year, scoring 13 points. So the scoring dropped off fairly significantly, but Derek Ryan still remains a pretty valuable player. Derek Ryan is that fourth-line center kind of guy at this point in his career, provides decent offense, nothing crazy, but the big thing with Derek Ryan is the defense. 91st percentile in terms of even strength defensive wins above replacement, 63rd percentile in terms of penalty kill wins above replacement, so nothing crazy there. But the Leafs, for the past handful of years, have been looking for a right-handed center that can win faceoffs and play a defensive game for them. They tried to get it at the deadline with Riley Nash. Given the injury and everything like that, they never really got a clean mix there. But Derek Ryan would absolutely provide that. They were interested in him in the past. Now, having cleared waivers, having had a down season at 34, how much do we really think Derek Ryan's going to get? I can't imagine it's anything like significantly over $1.25 million or anything like that. He's projected at 2 years at $2 million by Evolving Wild. Again, he's a player that I feel like doesn't get that kind of contract unless I'm mistaken, but I feel like he isn't, after coming off of 13 points in 43 games, having cleared waivers, all this stuff, a mid-30s player that's a depth player. I feel like he's somebody that the Leafs could probably get for a decent chunk, and having shown interest in him in the past, maybe there's that relationship there as well. So Derek Ryan is a player that I would definitely be interested in for the Leafs to play that depth center role. And we saw in the playoffs when John Tavares got hurt, things kind of went downhill at that point in terms of the center depth. You had Pierre Engvall playing third line minutes. You had Jason Spezza playing fourth line center. You had Joe Thornton playing center at some points. You had some weird mixes at that point. Signing a guy like Derek Ryan, even if he isn't in your lineup every single night, provides that depth. He can play center, he can play the right wing, but he can be a defensive force for you at even strength and provide a little bit of value on the penalty kill. And I think those two things would provide some decent value signing for the Leafs. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. Those are kind of 5 guys that I've looked at in terms of the positions of need for the Leafs at forward with the free agent class we have on hand. There's plenty more different options. There's actually quite a few decent options in free agency this summer when you look at wingers. Not as much in terms of centers, but there's quite a few different avenues the Leafs can go down. I've targeted Nick Bonino as a third-line center. I've targeted Tomas Tatar and Jaden Schwartz as top 6 left wingers. I also like Brock McGinn and Derek Ryan as depth pieces. But let me know who you want the Leafs to sign in free agency. There's quite a few options, as I just mentioned. There's plenty more. Whether you like the guys I mentioned, whether you don't like them, let me know in the comments down below. In these next couple of weeks, things are going to come thick and fast once we get to the expansion draft, then the actual entry draft, and then free agency all happening in kind of a week's time. It's going to be a hectic time in Leafland with plenty of moves to come. And a big offseason on hand for Kyle Dubas. But that's going to do it for this one. If you enjoyed this, I'm trying something a bit different here. So if you enjoyed this, please give it a like. Subscribe for more Leafs content coming over the summer and potentially into the season as well. Trying something different here. Be sure to follow me on Twitter as well. That's where I primarily do my Leaf stuff and everything like that, at Kyle_Kush on Twitter. And thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.